All right. Hello and welcome to Dynamics of a Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to Professor James Moriarty, Napoleon of Crime, and archnemesis of Sherlock Holmes. I am your forever fangirling host, Madeline Quinones, and I am joined by my lovely co-host,
Dixie Parkinson.
And boy, we have got such an exciting episode for you today. I am so sorry. I'm going to be so fangirly today. Oh my gosh. But, so here's the thing. You may have heard by now about a new audio drama podcast out on Audible, produced by Treefort Media, called Moriarty, the Devil's Game. So, of course, we were all over that. And it is a terrific series. I think that we are both in love with it, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. And today we actually have the very exciting opportunity of being able to speak with both the writer and the director / executive producer of the show. I'm just, oh my goodness, what a time. What a time. So before we bring our guests on, let's introduce them really quick. Charles Kindinger is the creator and executive producer of the Audible original Moriarty, The Devil's Game, an award-winning writer of film, television, and audio fiction. His previous projects include the theatrically released Kill Switch, starring Dan Stevens, and Edge of Winter, starring Joel Kinnaman and Tom Holland.
And Elliot Blake is an animation producer, occasional comic book writer, the co-host of the podcast Day Drinking with Gary and Elliot, and the director and executive producer of Moriarty, The Devil's Game.
And we are so excited to have them on. All right, so hello, Charles and Elliot, and welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you here.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, we're excited to be here.
Okay, so when we have people on, I told you this is our first serious interview, and it's true, but it is not our first interview. We do have 4 questions that we like to ask people. So Dixie, do you want to get started?
Okay. So the first question, who was your first Moriarty?
Elliot, do you have one?
Like a first Moriarty that we were that we were exposed to and became infatuated with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had read some Sherlock Holmes when I was younger, and so I remember encountering Moriarty then, but really the one that really made an impression on me, because I was not as big a Sherlock head as Charlie, was the Moriarty from the BBC Sherlock, from the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock.
Yeah, Andrew Scott was great.
Andrew Scott, thank you. I was blanking on his name. Sorry, Andrew.
I'm sure he's gonna be very upset when he.
I'm sure.
Yeah, for me, I guess again, like my first exposure was in the books, like Elliot, and then as far as adaptations go, I will say the Jared Harris character from Game of Shadows. Even though I was probably watching the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock and the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock probably around the same time, so it's fuzzy to me like which one I saw first, but I think the Jared Harris one for me was probably the first one I saw, and I loved it. I mean, he does such a fantastic job.
He really did. Game of Shadows is like one of my top favorite Sherlockian movies. I just think it's so good.
Love it. I hope they're gonna do another one. I really do.
I do too, but oh my gosh, it's been more than 10 years now. I'm not sure.
I'm holding out hope. We'll find a way to get to Robert, and we'll make it happen. Right? That's actually why I wanted to make the show, is so that I could show Robert and all the guys and all the people that make that show that I'm capable of writing the third one. And if they need me, if they need someone, I'm more than happy to jump in and take a swing.
You got it in the bag. You got
The
it in the
world needs
bag.
more of it. I just feel like the world needs more of that. So
For sure. Well, I feel like it would take, another kind of like big time adaptation maybe to kind of kick them back into gear.
yeah.
Kind of like the way BBC Sherlock actually, the BBC lit the show after the success of the first Robert Downey Jr. movie.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, Sherlock Holmes can be successful. Okay, let's go.
That's right.
So maybe it can work in reverse. Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Okay, so this question is kind of similar. Who is your favorite Moriarty? It can be more than one, and it can even be your own.
Well, I'm very. I guess I would say for me, the one that from our show is probably my favorite, given that he's been living in my head for quite some time, and we've gotten to know each other quite well. But that seems like kind of a cop-out. So again, I go back to it's really a toss-up between Adam Scott and Jared Harris for me. I think they're both interesting in different ways. Adam Scott is just like this complete maniac, and I think having him in the present is kind of cool, and seeing like what's a Moriarty in the present day look like. But then I really love that the Jared Harris character, like we get to spend time meeting him as an actual professor and like doing professorial things. And, that first meeting between them, it's all subtext about what's going on.
Right.
Because on the surface, it's all very, polite and very posh and British, of course. So yeah, they're I can't choose. I don't know. But if I had to choose, I'd choose my own. That's the only way I can go. Elliot, what do you think?
Oh, it's definitely ours. To get to contribute something to that, I don't know, canon, I guess, and kind of turn it on its ear was a lot of fun. And I just think that Dominic Monaghan was so great.
Yeah.
Bringing Charlie's words to life, that he will forever and always be my favorite Moriarty.
Yeah, he's certainly my headcanon now.
Yeah,
for the whole universe. So.
Yeah.
He was terrific. Oh my goodness.
Okay, and now, why do you love this character?
Elliot, I'll throw it to you first. I mean, okay. I got answers. I got answers, but I want to give Elliot a chance to kick us off.
Well, I will say that I didn't have any abiding love or dislike for Moriarty until I started working on this with Charlie, and so Charlie's way into the character and kind of creating this backstory, this expansive backstory for him, and kind of getting to understand why he is like he is why he's my favorite character. Because I do like misunderstood characters, misunderstood villains. We talked a lot about the future. Charlie and I, while working on this, talked a lot about The Fugitive and the Harrison Ford movie, and talked about Richard Kimball, who is clearly a misunderstood character, and that there are some parallels there. And I like those kinds of characters in fiction. I'm gonna turn this interview on its ear for 1 second, and I'm gonna ask you guys why you love Moriarty so much, because you've dedicated a whole podcast to him. So you're Moriarty super fans, and I'm very curious what it is about Moriarty that who is until our thing came along was quite the villain. So I want to know why. What about him was so appealing that has led you to this venture that you have here?
Well, Dixie, how about you start?
For me, I always love villains. I always find them very interesting, especially when you try and figure out like why they are the way that they are. And I love villains that are like the equal and opposite to the hero, which Moriarty very much is to Sherlock Holmes. So that's, I think, what initially fascinated me with the character. And it's just been interesting, like delving into adaptations that explore the character a lot deeper than the canon does, especially like yours is probably the one that's gone the deepest into the character so far of the ones I've either read or listened to. And I just find it fascinating working out what his motivations are.
For context, like her favorite fictional character of all time is the Master from Doctor Who is the mirror character of the Doctor. So this is very on brand for her.
And I mean, he was literally based on Moriarty, so.
Yeah. Cool.
For me, it was the description of him in the final problem is so great. Even though you barely get to see him, it's still a really great description. But I wasn't really paying so much attention to his character until I started writing fan fiction. And even then it was like I got through a whole draft of a novel and then I was like, he is so flat. I wrote him so flat. I was like, that's no good. I can write better than that. So like I scrapped that and went back and I'm like, okay, so who is this guy? Who also is Moran? So I started trying to figure them out, and as I did, I just fell in love with them both. I just think that they're both very fascinating characters, and I think that Moriarty is kind of an unusual villain because, I mean, he specifically starts out as a child prodigy and an academic, and then somehow he goes from being that to being, the criminal kingpin of London. So it's a very interesting transition. And then Dixie and I would just talk about Moriarty all the time. So then, and I'd always wanted to do a podcast, and then finally it clicked. I was like, oh, hey, why don't we just turn these conversations into a podcast? And she agreed. So here we are.
Fun. I would say for me, it's probably a blend of everything that's been said here. A lot of it for me was I respond to strong characters, no matter who they are. But so in Holmes, we have this mastermind that we all fall in love with, and I fell in love with early on. But then to see a character finally kind of push him to his limits was very interesting to me, of like, oh, we finally brought in someone kind of his equal. Because in many of the stories, Sherlock is clearly like the best guy around, right? And he's smart, and he's making everyone else look like imbeciles comparatively, right? And here we have in the final problem, like an introduction to someone that's like, this man is basically my equal. I just became fascinated with like, well, there's this cat and mouse game that's been going on behind the scenes that we don't even know about. And obviously that was part of the inspiration for what we wanted to do here, was kind of flesh out, what has been going on? And then to your point, I'm very interested in people who start on one journey in life, as an academic, and then decide I'm going to be a criminal. Okay, well, why? I think that was that. And in the books, in the canon, it's not really explicit as to why. So again, I really love all this stuff about the canon, like the gaps that are there, like the untold stories, the sentence here and there that kind of just like, wait a second, like there's a whole other mystery here that they just like say in passing, and then we don't ever get to hear about it. And so what I love about the canon most is just like thinking and dwelling on like, well, what does that mean? And what are the implications of this larger universe? And Moriarty to me is one of the biggest gaps in the canon, right? It's just like, he kind of comes out of nowhere, and then they kind of retrofit him after the final problem. It was like, oh yeah, he was the guy that was behind a lot of the stuff that we've been, it's like, okay, cool. I get why you might need to do that from like a writing standpoint and a storytelling standpoint. But yeah, I just think like he's so underserviced in the canon. But to me, as a writer and as just someone who loves to kind of like sit in a world and live in it and think about it, he presents this amazing opportunity to just be like, wow, I wonder how a really smart person decides to use their wits for crime. And yeah.
Spoken like a true Sherlockian.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to be one. I can't claim to be a Sherlockian. I'm just a huge fan. I don't really know when. This is a question for you guys. When do you go from just like super fan to Sherlockian? Like when can you put that in your email signature? What's this transition? Do you have to be like knighted by somebody or like approved?
Well, my argument, and this is a little bit different from the norm, maybe, or maybe I should say it's a little different from the perspective of some older fans, because there is a little bit of a generational gap. But my feeling is that if you love the stories and if you dwell on them a lot, and if it pushes you to create something, you're a Sherlockian, and that's it.
Okay.
I think that this is like the oldest fandom that there is, right?
No.
The fandom has been going on for over 100 years now. And it does have a history of some gatekeepy kind of behavior. And,
as all fandoms do.
Right. But this one has been doing it the longest.
Yes, for sure.
And so, yeah, I was recently, I've gotten to meet a very young Sherlockian who she wrote a short story and got it published in an anthology, and she's like, well, I hope to someday call myself a Sherlockian. And I'm like, hun, you just published a story. You're a fan. That makes you a Sherlockian. Don't gatekeep yourself.
There you go, Charlie.
There you go.
You are a Sherlockian. You heard it here first.
I am, I'm not sure I'm worthy of the title, but I do spend a lot of time thinking about Sherlock, especially these days.
I like to say it's not a title that you can acquire. It is something that you are.
Yeah.
So that's my feelings about it, and I feel very strongly about it, and I will fight anybody about it.
Good. I love the inclusive take on things, because like I've interacted with a few scholars, that they even have like BSI in the title,
right,
of their email signature, and I'm like, that's cool. I'm there for it. I hope to someday be able to do that myself. But it does seem like there's another level to some of these to some of the fandoms anyway.
It's sort of like obviously you get a little more respect if you have done something, if you've written papers, if you've given presentations, or if you do adaptations. And are either of you aware that Curtis Armstrong is VSI?
I am very aware. Oh yeah. That's one of the big reasons we wanted to have him involved. Because when we were making this, especially in the writing phase, I would stay up all night worried that I was going to like really upset, some of the true Sherlockians out there.
Can confirm.
And then I would call Elliot the next day and be like, I'm not sleeping. I don't know. Are we just completely desecrating the canon? In a lot of ways we are, but we're just trying to have fun. And will they see it that way? I don't know. And this was all happening too. We were writing this kind of as Game of Thrones was winding down. And that particular fan base had a very strong reaction to the way that at least that the show ended.
Mhm.
And in the back of my head, I'm like, I'm doing the same thing. I'm just lighting this on fire.
I don't I don't think that you did the same thing at all.
Yeah.
I am not part of the Game of Thrones fandom, neither of it. Well, Dixie, you've read it.
I've read the books, but I haven't
Yeah.
seen the series.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
But watching that crash and burn in real time was really something. But definitely I think BBC Sherlock, which by the way I love from start to finish.
Yeah.
I am one of the fans who still like loves it even at the end of it. And not everybody does, but it was a very clear demonstration that sometimes there is a line and maybe you don't want to cross it, but I'm not sure that you want to cross that line, because I think that your love for the stories and your understanding of the characters still really tracks. And I gotta say, and let's see if I can say this without being spoilery, Sherlock Holmes is not a good guy in your story. And for some people that will be a turnoff. It won't be for everybody, but it will be for some people, which I'm sure you had an idea that would be the case.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I do love Sherlock Holmes above any other character in the canon, even Moriarty. But I am always interested in like a story that understands Sherlock Holmes and still makes him not the good guy. And I think that you handled that really well. I think that you handled it really believably, because I feel like he was still recognizably him, but it was just like, but it worked.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, like, and again, bringing it back to Curtis, he had said similar things when he read the script and we brought him in to record, and that was like a relief for me, because I was really worried up until that point of like, first and foremost, are the people who love Sherlock Holmes going to love this? Because if people like you and Dixie, if you don't love it, then we're dead in the water, you know. And yeah, a big part of it for us was like keeping the spirit of Sherlock Holmes and the canon there, but just finding places where we could emphasize certain qualities maybe of Sherlock, or de-emphasize others, you know, push and pull to serve the story that we wanted to tell. And we really tried our best not to come out of left field with too many things. Obviously for the story, we had to kind of like rewrite some of the canon, but wherever possible, I'm going to bring something. I brought some show and tells to this.
Good.
So I have this. This was one of the first. You know this? You guys have?
I don't have my own copy, but yeah, I've been after one.
Yeah, so I got this on Amazon. It's actually, there's two of these books,
right?
And you can see I have like some a lot of sticky notes in there, because what I really wanted to do in the research and the writing phase was like make this as closely tied to the world that we all love as possible, you know, and the annotated versions do a great job, and there's newer ones too that I have that are digital, but this one was like the first one. I was up in bed highlighting and like saying, oh well, what if this, and like figuring out, you know, okay, well, if they like, how do they get to the falls? Like, what's the journey to? They go into depth of like, well, what would be the best way for them to get to the falls, given the time and the way the trains were of that era. And like, we tried our best to be as accurate to as many of the details as we could. And I feel like that is what gets us some creative license with people like yourselves and Curtis, of people like, okay, he said it when he came in to record, like he was seeing the details and the Easter eggs that we were throwing in there to just to tell the fans, like, we know what we're doing. We're not a couple of a couple of dudes who decided like, let's just tear Sherlock Holmes apart and like do our own thing. Like we really are coming from a place of love and respect for the canon, and then just trying to build a fun story on top of it.
I think that really shows.
Yeah, I think you definitely succeeded.
Well, that's the best review we could ever get, honestly. And you're right, there are a lot of, well, I wouldn't say a lot. There are a few people that are particularly upset about our take, that have voiced their opinions online, but it's not for everyone, and that's okay.
You know what? Literally no Sherlockian adaptation ever has been immune from that.
Yeah.
Absolutely none of them, even the ones that are revered as classics.
Well,
It is definitely a thing that happens, so you're in good company.
okay, good.
Can't please everyone. Can't please everyone.
No, you can. You definitely can't. So
Especially not in fandom.
yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we actually still have one question left.
Okay.
Oh wow. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. Cool.
Last question. What is one canon story besides The Final Problem, The Empty House, and The Valley of Fear that you think Moriarty was definitely involved in?
Charlie, that one's definitely for you.
Yeah, I'm thinking it through here. I have a suspicion that he was involved in Scandal in Bohemia. But again, I don't know for sure. It's not. I just feel like in that world, he would have known Irene Adler. There would have been like they would have crossed paths somewhere, and I know like that's not a hot take. I think a lot of people are like, yeah, Moriarty, Irene Adler, they're definitely like, obviously the Jared Harris version, they work together on some stuff, right? And I'd like to believe that's the case. And so when I think of Scandal in Bohemia and what's happening in that story, I could see Moriarty behind the scenes, helping facilitate all of that. But I'm interested to hear your takes on that.
Well, on Scandal in Bohemia specifically, I think that he could have been involved in it, but from a different angle. Because I think that if the story had happened just a few years earlier, the King of Bohemia would have been coming to him rather than to Sherlock Holmes.
Okay.
Because stealing the photograph back, I mean, it's stealing, it's actual theft. And it's interesting that the king comes to to Sherlock Holmes. By this time, he's getting to be a well-known private detective to do that, rather than Moriarty, who is a consulting criminal. Is interesting that in that sense, they're almost a little bit business rivals.
Yeah. Here's another one that just sprung to mind, and I'm not actually sure. I admit I don't have the timeline in my head. Could Moriarty have been involved in the Bruce Parrington plans? Because that's another one that we looked at for this story as a potential plot point that I was like, oh, it's a submarine that plans that go stolen against like a government conspiracy. I'm in. It feels very Moriarty-ish.
Well, the funny thing about that one is that the story says that it takes place in 1895, so it's 4 years after Reichenbach.
Okay, so technically, no.
Yeah. However, the funny thing is that I did once co-write a fan fiction in which he was still alive and responsible for or involved in the theft. So it's like yes and no.
Well, I mean, like if Sherlock can survive the plunge into the falls, why can't Moriarty? What do we, why not? I think that works. That tracks for me.
So I'm going to recommend something really quickly. If you haven't read it yet, this is something that you might enjoy.
Oh, okay.
Moriarty by Daniel Corey. Who published this? It was by Image Comics. So it's an oddball story, which a lot of Sherlockian comics are. But yeah, I think that you might enjoy that. So
well, now that we're done making at least the first season and kind of have like established our own thing, I'm very open to seeing what other people have done in the space. We tried, at least I did, to kind of avoid a lot of the Moriarty fan fiction that's out there, because I didn't want to be accused of stealing, and I just didn't even want to have it in my head.
yeah.
You know, something like Moriarty the Patriot, which I know is very popular in a lot of circles. I'm not into that. Is it anime? It's anime.
Manga.
Manga.
Yeah.
It's not something I would read normally anyway, but I also didn't want to potentially pollute the mind waters with whatever. But I'm aware that it's like, this is not the first time Moriarty's been, you know, posed as like an empathetic character. Let's put it that way.
Kind of like an anti-hero or anti-villain.
Yeah.
In both Moriarty the Patriot and in your story, he kind of goes, I would say he kind of goes from being hero to anti-hero. I'm not sure that there's some line crossing, but then I feel like there's some line crossing back. Yeah. I'm not sure that he's really ever fully the villain in your story. That's maybe a spoiler, but so with the 4 questions out of the way, where actually did this idea come from? Like, how did this get started?
Sure. So I think this is something I've been thinking about probably, 2022? Yeah. At least 14 years. This has been somewhere on my computer. I had the idea early on. I wanted to do a Sherlock Holmes story, and I was looking at the canon for inspiration. And the final problem, again, we spoke to the gaps, right? And there's just like a paragraph in the final problem which is like, yeah, we've been doing battle for months, and this guy's, you know, he's my intellectual equal, and I think I finally got him. And I'm just like, how come there isn't a story about that? Where is that, you know? So that was like the first kind of kernel of it. And then, you know, the more I looked at it, the more, and then just into the deeper world of the canon, the more you start to realize, well, there are a lot of inconsistencies in Watson's retelling of events, right? Oh, I hear Pepper in the background. Pepper agrees.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, she's totally into it.
Pepper agrees. We've spoken at length about the inconsistencies in the canon and how sometimes the timeline's off, or it's like, well, we have to introduce Moriarty twice to Watson because didn't I tell you about the guy? Like, and so I'm like, okay, so that to me gave me the permission to be like, well, maybe the way we've retold these stories or the way Watson wrote them down isn't necessarily the truth. You know, maybe he got some stuff wrong. And what does it look like when he gets stuff wrong? And so that's kind of like those two big ideas started to kind of come together, and the idea of Moriarty being the good guy was formed. And then it took a very long time to convince somebody that this was a worthwhile endeavor. I think the royal we, I had the idea, again, back when there was a BBC Sherlock, Robert Downey Jr. was doing Sherlock, there's Elementary here in the States. And so like there was a lot of Sherlock going around. And so everyone I kind of pitched the idea to was like, we're kind of at like peak Sherlock right now. We don't need any more. And so it went away for a while until a couple of years ago, I was telling my buddy Elliot here about the idea, because Elliot, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had a relationship to Treefort, and that they were looking for audio drama material specifically. And I said, well, I kind of have this idea, and I sent it to Elliot, right? Is that right?
Well, the full story is that it was actually we were just catching up because it had been a while since we had seen each other, and you had so we were having coffee down the street, and that came up, and I said, you know, I know a guy who is looking for some stuff. And that's really how it, and so we decided to team up on it and pitch it to Treefort Media, which is the where I knew the guy, and they totally loved it. And so they said, well, we want to be a part of this, and so that got the ball rolling.
Nice. That is really cool.
Yeah.
So then, because I actually haven't done a lot of Audible listening. Like, how did it get to Audible?
Sure. Yeah. So once Treefort got on board and it became real, they very quickly they had a relationship with Dominic Monaghan, who sparked to the idea of being our Moriarty, and he kind of came on board very early. And I mean, Elliot, I don't know if you remember, like, was it 5 years ago we had like a meeting with him?
I think it was
several years ago, 6.
It was. I think no. I think it was only 4.
Okay.
It feels like 5 or 6 or 7 because of the intervening, because 2020, and
Right.
it felt like two or 3 years by itself.
It's been 10 years since 2019, right? So
Yes.
So we brought Dominic on board, and they were very excited. But very quickly we realized to really give the show a shot in the podcasting or audio drama space, like, you needed more than just a pitch and a casting attachment. You needed a script, and so I went off, and for free I wrote the first draft of the pilot to kind of give people an idea of, like, this is kind of where things start. And we had a pretty good idea too of where the show went. So we created a lot of the Bible, which changed over time, but like a lot of the bones are still there of, here's the story we're going to tell, here's how each episode breaks down. And then we recorded a trailer with Dom, who was kind enough, I believe he did it for free.
I believe he did.
He and Elliot directed him, and we put together like a 1 or 1.5 minute like teaser trailer. That's not the thing that's up on Audible now.
okay.
But it was just kind of, we put together this package that Treefort then took, and they shopped it around. I think they shopped it around pretty much to all the major podcast players in the space, like Spotify and
and at the time, I mean, the podcast space has been evolving very quickly and changing over the last several years. I mean, and so even when it was getting pitched, the number of places that were actively investing in audio dramas was not a lot. But Audible definitely was definitely one of those places, and they saw something in it.
Yeah, they came in a big way, and really gave us the opportunity to build out, like, to pay for the writing and the development of the show, and then give us enough money to assemble the cast and do the recording the right way. Because I think we all were in agreement. We didn't want to do, if we couldn't do it right, we weren't going to do it. And luckily Audible, they have this whole originals programming where, on top of their normal service, they have this amazing thing that they're doing. And that's kind of how it got to Audible.
Okay. So Dominic Monaghan was involved from really early on. Was it just a natural matter of course that Billy Boyd joined as Moran?
So Elliot, go ahead. I'll let you.
Oh, well, there was another Moran. I can't say who it was, but there was another Moran at one point. And but these things, these projects are any entertainment product that you make, generally speaking, is not a fast process, and sometimes people get busy and then they fall out. And so I mean, in fact, the Sherlock that we have was also not our original Sherlock, and it's for the same reason. It's just that sometimes these things take time to make, and people get busy and they do other things. And so but when it came time to start thinking again about who we wanted for Moran, I believe it was Dom who suggested, well, hey, why not Billy? And it was such a natural yes.
Duh.
I mean,
why did we think of this earlier?
Of course. I mean, it's like that. Yeah, exactly. Why didn't we think of it earlier? Because we knew that we wanted to have for Moriarty and Moran to have to develop a deep friendship, and that was already on the page when Billy came in, and having the two of them in the room recording, and they already have this deep bond, and they've been best friends for a long time, and so even though they're acting, you can hear it.
Right.
And we were able to really lean into that natural rapport, and so it was a real get for us. I mean, we were super thrilled, and I think that Billy was just, I mean, both of them are great. I think Billy was amazing in this role, and you can tell, I think he's having fun.
Yeah, and just to add to that, like because of COVID, we were not allowed to be in the recording booth.
Oh yeah.
with anyone, and all the actors, they had to be in their recording booth by themselves for this. And it was a union thing, but obviously everyone understood. But Dom and Billy just said, screw that, we're gonna record together, and all their scenes they recorded across, like they're in the same room. They're the only two actors that were in the same room together for the entire process. So but they're just buddies, and they didn't want to do it separately. So it was just like, for them, a fun thing to do. Like they got to hang out and make this cool thing. And you can really, I think, in all their scenes, like it really shows that like they're there together, just going back and forth. We didn't have to edit them together like that. It's just like we just put the track in and let it go, right?
My eyes are shaped like hearts right now. Like, I mean, yeah, seriously, Lord of the Rings was coming out as I was becoming a teenager, so they were still like a very big part of my young life and teen whatever, they were a big part of that. And I was interested when I first when like information about this first came out, about a year or so ago, year and a half maybe, and Dominic Monaghan was going to be playing Moriarty, and I was just like, ooh, that's interesting. I wonder if Moran is going to be part of this, because unfortunately with Moriarty focused stories, just because he's there doesn't mean Moran is going to be there. And even if Moran is there, doesn't mean that he's going to be treated as positively as Moriarty is. Mm-hmm. And then, it's like a few weeks ago that I finally saw that Billy Boyd was going to be Moran. And I was just like, what? I was so excited. I was just over the moon. And I think, so like a good, I shouldn't say that. A lot of adaptations will cast Holmes and Watson based on their chemistry with each other, because that's going to be an important part of the story. I have never known before for the Moriarty actor and the Moran actor to already be friends, and that be, a part of the casting and a part of the story. And I love it. I love it so much.
We're glad. I mean, again, once we had Dom, he has a whole group of fans, and they of course have that amazing podcast, Friendship Onion, and it really just like, it became like such a slam dunk to us when it kind of fell into place, because yeah, they are really actually friends that hang out together and do all this stuff together, and yeah, their chemistry is amazing.
Yeah,
and you can really feel it in the audio.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's so good, so good. I love like the promo photos of the two of them. I saw like this one progression that's like they start out being straight faced, and then it devolves down into like the two of them laughing, and it's so cute.
Yeah, I'm sure they have a bunch of behind the scenes like videos that they release on their social channels that just shows them goofing off, and like it's really them. Like because we were on Zoom for a week with them, and we would see them. They're not acting. Like between takes, they would just be like bickering back and forth like friends do, right? And like making each other laugh and telling jokes, and it was very entertaining. Like I hope someday we'll be able to release the stuff that isn't part of the show, but it's just them behind the scenes having a good
Oh,
time. Yeah.
we'd love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so looking at, we kind of like already had answered some of these other questions, but like what about the rest of the cast? Like you know, Phil LaMarr ends up being like one of the very few Black Sherlock Holmeses out there. Not the first one, but one of the very few. And you know, it's really cool to have him. Or I mean, I know he's like one of those voice actors who is everywhere. I to me, he's still Bail Organa in Star Wars: The Clone Wars. That's one of his many roles. So
Well,
like,
I think for you know, a lot of fans, he is a lot of different things. He's Static Shock. He's John Stewart. You know, John Stewart, Green Lantern. So he is you know, he embodies a lot of roles. He's Hermes Conrad on Futurama, which I worked on back in the day, and so he is. He inhabits a lot of minds in a lot of different roles. And the amazing thing about Phil is that he is a chameleon and can do anything and then do it incredibly well. And he's also, I mean, now, and this is a serious role, but he's also just hilariously funny. And so he's just a colossal talent. And so it was that we got to have him in this was also very exciting for us.
Very exciting. And to your point, we were looking to add as much diversity to the cast as possible when we were like going through this, because of course Victorian London, pretty like, I mean, in the stories themselves, it's a lot of straight white men, like, and so wherever possible, we wanted to look for ways to be more inclusive and add some diversity to the cast. And even in our story, like there were more characters that unfortunately we just had to cut for time, and more to Charlotte and to our Rose character that we you know, we wanted as much as possible to add some diversity, because to the voices themselves too, you know, like it can be very boring to be listening to the same type of voices all the time. So and again, bringing in Phil, like he's a pro's pro. Like the man came in, one take, got it. We should just do a second one just to be safe, to make sure the mic was working. But like the guy nailed it on the first take almost the whole way through, and even like had done his research. I don't know when he had time, because he kind of like, we asked him if he wanted to do it. He's like, yes. And then like the next couple of days we were already doing it, but he was testing me on facts in the stories and pronunciations and like, and things, you know, he's not British, but like he knew more about how to speak British than I did. So just an amazing talent. We're so lucky that he agreed to be a part of this.
that's terrific. And so you've already talked about, you know, like why you brought Curtis Armstrong on, but yeah, how was it working with him?
Great. I mean, you know, I mean, we were very fortunate with our cast in that we got a lot of. I mean, pretty much everyone in this is a working actor, and I mean that in the best possible way. It's like that these are people who are just solid professionals who really know their craft and bring something to the table when they come in to perform. And they're not just there to read lines, they're there to inhabit those characters, even on a small scale. And so they really bring a lot. And Curtis was great. He was totally into the role of Gregson. Really relished having the opportunity to play him. In fact, I think he said on Twitter that, like last week, I guess, or when the show came out, that it was a dream come true, that he's been a Sherlockian his whole life. And so to get to finally do something in the Sherlock world, it was a dream come true. And he brought everything he had to it, and it was fantastic. It was great. And I said to him, it's like, if you had told me that, I remember, look, he doesn't shy away from the fact that he was Booger in Revenge of the Nerds.
Right.
And I saw that on video when I was a teenager, and Booger made an impression on me, and in his burping prowess. And when you're a 14-year-old kid, that you remember that kind of stuff. And so I said to him, I was like, this is, if anybody had told me that I would get to be directing you one day, I would have said no way. And if I got to be directing him in an audio drama, I would have said, what's an audio drama? But but it was 1980. Nobody knew what an audio drama was. It was 1984. So, but at any rate, he's great, and it was a real, for me, it was a real thrill.
A real thrill. It was great to be able to call my parents up and be like, by the way, this Curtis is going to be part of the show, because they know who he is, and and they love him too. And then, as I said before, like having someone come in and be like, by the way, I am a Sherlockian expert. I'm in the BSI and I approve, was like, oh, thank God. Because I was really worried. So, and yeah, he plays the role beautifully. And we couldn't be more blessed to have someone like, wherever possible, we wanted true fans to be a part of it too, because they bring that passion to the role that,
right.
That maybe another wouldn't. And he certainly did. And he's got like some of the first lines in the show.
He does.
Yeah, he's basically the first person we meet. And I thought that was pretty cool. So
yeah, I was so excited, and I knew that that he was excited to be doing this, and yeah, it was so much fun to get to hear him as Gregson. I actually got to meet him this past spring at 221BCon in Atlanta.
Cool.
And spent a lot of the weekend actually hanging out with him, and he's such a sweetheart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was just like that connection. He's somebody who's kind of a friend, and I'm getting to hear him in this. So it's
cool.
A lot of fun.
That's very cool.
So let's see. I don't know, Dixie, can we do more gushing about Billy's Moran? What haven't we said yet? Because I'm just, I don't know, you look like you have a thought. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that. So we're huge Moran fans here on the podcast, and it was so great to get an adaptation where that does him justice, because most of them either leave him out entirely or they just don't do much with him.
Yeah.
So it was so much fun, and often he doesn't get any scenes with Moriarty. So getting an adaptation where his friendship with Moriarty is one of the central parts of it was just great.
Yeah, that was there from the beginning. We knew, especially in this format, we needed to have someone that Moriarty could talk to. Much like Watson is there to be a sounding board for Sherlock, and for Sherlock to kind of explain the genius things that are happening, in his mind, we needed that kind of everyman character to be the sidekick. And obviously, Moran's, he's in the canon, and there's very little about him, but what is in there is like oh, it's this, he's lived an interesting life.
Yes, he
Uh,
has.
and you know, it was just so much fun getting to kind of like take what's in there, and then again just kind of like, okay, well, if he had those experiences as a soldier and an assassin, like what where would he be, and how would he find Moriarty, and then like where would they be different on ideas and have arguments, and then where would they see eye to eye? Like it had to be there, you know, especially because we needed someone for Moriarty to talk to. I mean, that was like step one from like a purely functional, like we don't want Moriarty to talk to himself. That would be boring. And then like, of course they had to become friends, and it was a lot of fun. He's probably, him and Charlotte were my favorite characters to write. Because they're the comic relief, right?
Oh,
They're
I
the
love
ones,
Charlotte.
yeah, they're like, it's a pretty heavy show at times, but I where we could, we wanted to drop jokes in and remember like we're just having fun here. Like it's you know, we're trying to be entertaining, and those two were a blast.
Yeah, to what Dixie said about Moran is like in very few adaptations compared to Moriarty being in so many. It's like people just in general don't seem to, now I know where I was going with this, don't seem to really just regard him very often as somebody who should be there if Moriarty is there. And I think I've always thought that that Moran is Moriarty's Watson, and that's definitely something that on screen we finally, it only took 2011 rolling around to get it in Game of Shadows, where Moran and Watson were very clearly like juxtaposed with each other, which is one of my favorite things actually about the movie. And then you go even further with that here, and I was just like, I just hope that a lot of there are, I don't know how many Moran fans are out there, but they are out there, and we are, there's not a lot that out there to satisfy our little Moran loving souls, and this really did it. So I really hope that that those fans find this show and pick it up, because I'm very sure that they're gonna love it. This was just like, this is everything that I've ever wanted from a Moran in an adaptation. It seriously was. Because I think, I mean, like, yes, he kills people for a living, and he's very upfront about that, and he's very pragmatic about that. On the other hand, in this particular version, I swear he still has more respect for life than Sherlock Holmes himself does. And he definitely understands that Moriarty has more respect for human life, and he tries to honor that. And at the same time, he's still a person. He's not a monster. He's just a person, and he has the same you know, needs and wants for companionship that everybody does. And I just love it that that he just, it's like he looked at Moriarty and he's like, he's kind of a disaster. He kind of needs taken care of. I guess I'm gonna do it because nobody else is.
Yeah. Well, I think a big thing for us was when we started to build out his character, the big question was like, okay, how do these two get together, and why do they stay together? And and the answer to that question, Moran is a huge part of that. You know, like, why does he stick around? He doesn't have to stick around. You know, after the prison escape, they could go their separate ways, and we thought long and hard about why somebody wouldn't just go, and and we thought, well, maybe, you know, obviously Moriarty would be good for business. It's good to have a smart guy around, you know, when you're doing criminal things. But also we really got interested in this idea of like, well, Moran spent some time in India, and like, what did he learn in India? Like, did he learn some of like the Eastern philosophies like around karma and fate and all the kind of stuff that Moriarty, as a scientist and a logician, would never like, he would never believe any of that. And that's kind of the cool yin and yang that we decided that brought them together, of like having them kind of argue about who was right and what was the right way to approach a situation. But then for Moran to be like, well, this guy saved my life. Like, I've got to stick around and help this guy out. From a karmic perspective it got him to stay around for a while until they spent enough time together to be friends, right?
Yeah, but it also it gave the karma gave Moran a code around which to build his life, and so he's able to justify the bad things that he does because he's got a code that he lives by, and why he is, even though he is an assassin and a criminal, why he's not necessarily a bad person.
Right.
So, you know, and that's what makes him interesting. And I mean, like, I will confess to not having been familiar with the Moran character before I started working on this with Charlie. And in my mind, Charlie's version of Moran is now the definitive version of the character. I mean, I don't, you know, I challenge anyone to come up with a better, you know, more interesting, more nuanced version of an assassin than what Charlie's come up with here. A gentleman assassin.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, seriously, I don't think that anybody has yet. So, and I think that anybody would have trouble coming up with a more nuanced version. And it's a very big deal for me personally to be saying this, because like all these years I've been such a huge fan of he's not in Granada Television's version of The Empty House with Jeremy Brett, Patrick Allen as Colonel Moran. I love that version of him. He's still visually my idea of Moran. He looks like the character should, and I also dug into Patrick Allen's background, and he did a lot of voice actor work himself. He was like one of the first big British voice actors. And so I really like further fell in love with his Moran kind of based on his other performances, you know? Yeah. So, but now it's like, I swear that Billy Boyd's Moran has just actually dethroned him, and I didn't think that was possible.
Okay.
So, but yeah, that was just so good. And yeah. And along those lines, I'm not sure at the same time that Dominic Monaghan is ever going to be my idea of Professor Moriarty, just because this Moriarty is so different from the one in my head. He's quite young. He's and at least at the start, he's quite innocent. And he never I feel like he never really stopped having he never actually stopped having a strict moral code. He doesn't always like stick with it, and then he literally gets sick when he doesn't. But and so for those reasons, he doesn't quite fit the professor in my head. But at the same time, it's you know, I've watched a lot of adaptations and read not as much pastiche as I would like, but also read a lot of fan fiction and stuff. So I have a multiverse of Sherlock Holmes. There are a lot of different variations that can exist for me.
Me too.
So,
I think that's true. I think that's true. I think that's one of the fun things about working in this universe, is that there are there are multiple versions, and there are opportunities to do multiple versions, and everyone, I think, who enjoys Sherlock Holmes or enjoys Moriarty has an opportunity to find their version somewhere in this wide and varied world of adaptations of this character. And so, and he's, Holmes himself is just such a timeless figure, that you can work him, you can put him pretty much in any time period. I mean, we see, it worked, the look at the Cumberbatch version, a modern version would work. I think there could be a science fiction version of him. It has, I don't know what it is yet, but I think it could work. It's like that genius detective works just about anywhere. And I think the same is true for Moriarty, is that you can put a character like him, especially because there are a lot of unanswered questions about him. You have a lot of opportunities to do different things with him and still be respectful of the work that came before and put him in different places. And I think that was the real key insight that Charlie had, I think, when he was working on this, and it really paid off, I think, in a great way.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's like I think that he's still very, he comes across very much as James Moriarty, just a different version. But it's like, I was a little leery about the romance aspect at first, because I always, sometimes people want to do that with Moriarty, and I'm kind of like, well, maybe. I think that you pulled it off. I think that you made it believable. And I with a brilliant character, like sometimes people just kind of want to derail the brilliance in favor of the romance, and he is still himself. He's still a logician, and he might fantasize about running away or whatever, but he's still he's still an academic, and he still loves all that stuff, and he still lives by having a blackboard and figuring things out. And I love that, actually, the blackboard thing. That was just something that I really enjoyed. Mr. Clay, we are going to need a blackboard and lots of chalk.
Yep.
That was terrific.
Thank you. I would just say to the love story aspect, it became thematically something really interesting for us to explore. How would a man who really views the world as in numbers and figures and black and white, and a man who doesn't really lend himself to feelings of the heart, what would it take for him to kind of break down and explore that other side, because I think there's that all of us have our the right side of the brain and the left side of the brain, and some stuff that's more logical and stuff that is more creative, and then there's this feeling of learning to trust your instincts and falling in love and all that kind of stuff. It would be so foreign to a man like that. But then to have this woman come into his life and spin him out of control so much that he's I have to keep her in my life. And then when she's taken away from him, it becomes the thing it's so illogical on one hand to do all the things he would do. So, but love, that people do crazy things for love. And that's kind of the pitch of our show, right?
It dispels all reason.
It dispels all reason,
as,
yes.
as Sherlock says on the stand.
And yeah, that was a big part of his motivation as a character was I don't think if he was thinking straight, he would have done any of the things he did in this show, but we needed a reason for him to really be motivated. And what better reason than to have your love ripped away from you, and in an unjust way. It seemed like a great jumping off point for his character.
Yeah, I think it totally worked. So I think probably about now is the time, especially because we've been going on for a little while, so I'll try not to keep you here for that much longer. But but going forward, here be spoilers. So audience, if you have not listened to the show yet, go listen, come back and watch the rest of this. You are not going to want to be spoiled. So gonna give everybody an opportunity to do that. Da, 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 da. Okay, so hopefully everybody's gone now. Let's listen. All right, so you know what? Let's talk about Rose first.
Okay.
The funny thing is, so you know, talking about right brain and left brain, I am so far right brain that I swear most story twists come as total surprises to me. And sometimes it's very frustrating because I'm like, oh, I should have seen that coming. The funny thing is, Dixie actually sort of was suspicious of the Rose twist.
Right from the start, I thought, oh, she's not really dead, because I don't believe it unless there's a body and it's a clearly identifiable body.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because Charlie and I were just talking about that the other day, is that how quickly will people figure this out? And we realize is that some people are going to figure it out quickly. And that's okay. That's just you know, you can't fool everyone.
It's still a really fun journey, and a lot of other stuff I didn't expect at all. Like just the whole direction you took Sherlock Holmes in, I wasn't expecting it. That was really fun to see.
Yeah, well, we wanted, I think that came out, well, that came out of the development process, if I'm remembering correctly, because there was a version, probably before Elliot, you were involved, where she was actually dead. And all this, you know, that wasn't, her being alive wasn't part of the story. But then we realized, you know, in sitting down and breaking out the season for Audible, we were like, well, it's a much better story if she's still alive. And then okay, it just, there's so many more interesting avenues to explore if she is you know, what if she is the woman that we turned her into, which is Irene Adler, spoiler alert, and then yeah, making her this shape-shifting character that is not good, not bad, somewhere in the middle that we're still not sure of, maybe at the end. And yeah, it was such a great way to finish things off, or at least that was a twist that we were like, we have to honor that. Once we came to it, we're like, we have to honor that. And then it just became about like, well, how quickly can we get over the part that she's not really dead in the beginning, and like, you know, and fool people like Dixie. I guess we didn't get everyone, and that's okay. Hopefully people still enjoy the story anyway. But yeah, I think the audio format also gives us a little bit more wiggle room, because if you're not really listening when that particular piece of information drops, or like it's easier to forget because you don't have a visual to go with the whole scene. Yeah, we thought long and hard about how to make it believable. And well, we get some people, we don't get others, but that's the game when you're doing a mystery story, I think. Because I think coming into a mystery show, an astute viewer or a listener like Dixie here is like, where's the twist? Where's the twist? Because if we're doing our job right, we're leaving you the breadcrumbs,
right,
and that none of the things you're hearing are supposed to be just like random facts. Like they all are supposed to line up and mean something. And people that love mysteries are like, you know, they're looking for those things to grab.
Yeah,
right.
That's part of the fun, is figuring out,
right,
picking up on the clues and then figuring out where it's going to go.
I was wondering, you know, obviously there's something odd going on with her in the flashbacks, and I was like, well, okay, maybe Holmes is partially right, and there was somebody else, but it was not a relationship that she wanted to be a part of any longer, because I think it was pretty clear that she genuinely had affection for James. And then I also wondered, like, oh, I wonder if maybe she's pregnant. So that was also a thought that I had. But and then, like, Irene was revealed to be part of the story, and I'm like, oh no, Irene's not going to be a bad guy again, is she? Because I don't like Irene being a villain. I don't like her being a straight up villain. And then there's the phonograph playing, and I was like, oh, wait a second, you're not telling me. Like, oh my gosh. So like I kind of figured it out just like a little bit before Moriarty did at that point. So that was like, oh my goodness. And then that's fun, because now we have even more material one of these days to do an episode about, like, Irene's connection to Moriarty and adaptations. So that'll definitely be an interesting time. But yeah, I just once that twist had finally played itself out, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So but yeah, she was, I liked Rose from the start. She was such a great character, and the flashbacks always made me so sad.
There were more too. Elliot, you can chime in here if you remember, but I know we had to cut some for time, basically.
Yeah, we did. I mean, I think the total running time of this is 5.5 hours. And there was in scripting, there are longer versions of pretty much every episode. So just because there's so much story to tell. And so there had to be some really careful and judicious editing to make sure that we didn't cut anything that was necessary to kind of keep the story moving forward, and that was necessary to keep the mystery in play. And so but I think what we wound up with is just a really nice, and I mean, even in 5.5 hours is really a nice tight version of the story. So but there was definitely stuff that got left on the on the floor.
As with any, as with any story, that there had to be cuts. But yeah, I loved writing those emotional scenes, because we don't have a lot of those elsewhere in the story, like where we touch on the heart and, like, why would this man do all these things? And we really wanted people to believe that he loved her and they had a good relationship, and it wasn't necessarily one-sided. There was something there. And hopefully Audible gives us time to tell another story, and then she'll get to be a part of it.
That would be fantastic. So yeah, there was the whole everything that went on with that, and it was wonderful. And I do think that the edits worked. I think that the pacing was really good.
Yeah, I thought the pacing was great. Like, I basically listened to the whole thing across the weekend, and I found it flowed really well. Like, I never got bored while listening to it.
Good.
That's
good. That was the idea.
And Elliot, it was a big part of that. Elliot and the Tree 14, because as Elliot said, I had probably a good 10 or 15 pages of fat on every episode, where, like, I just wanted more dialogue between Moriarty and Rose, or Moriarty and Moran. And it's not necessary, but it's just like jokes and them just kind of like shooting the shit. And, like, I just had a blast living in the world. And so once I found the character voices, I could just go, right?
Right. Yeah.
But for the sake of the audience, we trimmed out all the stuff that wasn't really necessary, and all the boring stuff. So
Well, I mean, it wasn't even necessarily boring. It was just stuff that we kept. Sometimes there were times where we realized that we needed to cut to the chase a little bit faster. And in
yes.
fact, even in actually editing, there were definitely places where we realized, oh, you know what, we don't actually need this. I mean, when we were editing the audio, where we were like, oh, you know what, we can actually live without this page. We can get to the same place and get there quicker and reward our audience a little bit faster if we make some of these trims. And that's a normal part of the process. So
Right.
that's just how it goes. So you learn quickly to kill your darlings. It's easier, I think, being as a producer and as the director to kill some of those darlings maybe than it was for Charlie, but because I was one step removed,
Right.
but yeah, but that's just how it goes.
The scenes will always exist on my computer and in my mind.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, exactly.
It's like, when you watch the Lord of the Rings extended editions, do they need to have those extra scenes? No. Like they made great movies the first time around, and
Yeah.
they're tighter. But like people love to just kind of sit in the world for a couple extra minutes here and there, and you can tell, like, yeah, I understand why they cut this. You don't really need it, but yeah, I'll always have it in my head. That's
So yeah, moving on from Rose, I do love that that the story wasn't, entirely male centric. It was nice having Mary and Mrs. Hudson, even if they didn't have a lot to do. It was still nice to hear from them. And you created Charlotte, who was such a wonderful character.
Yeah.
I just really loved her.
Charlotte's a funny story. She came out of we did, because my first choice in all the writing and the research and the creation of the show was to find characters that already existed and then just put our own spin on them.
Mm-hmm.
I had trouble finding a canonical character to do what I needed with the Charlotte character, and I think Elliot, I think we found one that worked, but was not in the public domain yet. I think there was, I can't remember.
That's possible. That's possible.
I think we had to change a name or something like that. And so she's one of the few made up like characters in the show that doesn't have a name that people familiar with the canon would know. But we knew we wanted, again, like to get as many female voices in there as possible. And like with Rose, there's a lot of Charlotte and Moran stuff, literal scenes that I thought were important that I lost battles on. With that, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot more there. And sadly, when things came to getting things down to time, we lost something. But again, I think we have a lot more story to tell. And when we do hopefully get that chance, all these people are going to have more weight and presence in the story. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, Moriarty left Charlotte in charge. So that even means that Charlotte is Moran's boss now, and there's so much fun that can be had with that tonight.
That's super juicy, right? Yeah.
So juicy.
Yeah.
I love that. That was fantastic. And I told Dixie earlier, I can just imagine like Moran like scuttling behind Moriarty and using him as a human shield.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, because there's only one person in the world Moran's afraid of, and it's her. That's the fun. That's the fun of their relationship. Is the man's not afraid of a man-eating tiger, but this woman, there's something about her that he's like, I don't want to mess with her.
I love that. It's terrific. She's fantastic. So I've got a couple of questions actually about Watson, who is apparently not actually named Watson.
Not in our version.
So is he even a doctor?
Elliot, go ahead.
I couldn't tell.
Not in our version. I think he's probably adept at doing some field dressings and stitching up some wounds here and there. But in our version, he is not a doctor. If we imagine him, I mean, as he explains, he's a fixer, and we imagine him as a Victorian John Wick, who works in service of Sherlock and the Crown. However, we don't really get to see him in action the way that you might get to in a visual medium. It's alluded to, though, that he is a badass amongst badasses, and again, another guy who's got a really interesting moral code that he lives by. And so he becomes a good foil for Moran and also for Moriarty because of that. So he's our version of him is I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm not, you guys are more of an expert than I am, but I don't think we've seen a version of Watson that like this one.
No, not quite. It's really interesting. Although it kind of reminds me of one pastiche by David Stuart Davies called The Veiled Detective, wherein Watson is also not his real name. He is still a doctor. He gets dishonorably discharged and basically goes back to England, doesn't have a future because of his dishonorable discharge. And then Moriarty picks him up and hires him to be a live-in spy with Sherlock Holmes. And that book is frustratingly short. I feel like it should have been so much long with that concept. It should have been so much longer than it was. But that's another story that you guys might enjoy. But yeah, your Watson is very unique, and I still liked him from the start. And that one episode was just so uncomfortable because this whole time you're rooting for Moriarty, but then it's like, James, do you want to rethink this? Maybe just a little bit.
That's what we were going for, really, is every episode we wanted to push Moriarty a little bit further to the dark side and just see, we think he's a good man, but what makes one of the big themes of our show is like, what makes a person evil? Is it the things they do or the reasons behind them? And that's something we explored a lot with Moriarty especially, and we knew we wanted to push him, and like, what better way to push him than to bring in like innocent people and the fold, much like he was once, and kind of hold a mirror up to him. And and then Watson proved to be the ultimate character for that, because again, like, once you start down this road of like taking the canon and then dissecting it and turning it into your own thing, you think of like, well, how did Watson and Sherlock get together in our version? If Sherlock is who he ends up being, working for the Crown with his brother and all that kind of stuff, who's Watson in this world? Well, Watson is, he's got to be someone different than the version that we all know, and we thought it would be really cool to be like, Watson's just like his, a made up name. They just gave it to him and said, like, here, you're now Sherlock's partner. For everyone that cares, you call yourself Dr. Watson. Here's your backstory, like a spy of the Victorian age, or a Victorian John Wick, as we like to say, like a man with a haunted past. But then he finds Mary, probably. I know he finds Mary during his workings with Sherlock, doing a different case. And that's what kind of pulls him out of the life and like gives him new meaning, and ends up being the thing that kind of drives a wedge between him and Sherlock. This is all not in the show, but it's in my it's in my head canon for if we ever.
Well, it's pretty well implied, I think.
And And I think we were held. I mean, again, this is another case where we had another amazing performance in Adam Godley, who embodies this version of Watson so incredibly well. I mean, he really was just, I think there are a lot of award-worthy performances in this thing, and I have to include his performances in Watson in that list. He gave so much depth to that character and richness to it that it really it helped brought out everything that Charlie had intended for that character.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, hopping from Watson to Sherlock, man, where to even start? I mean, the very first scene with Sherlock, I'm just sitting here thinking, like, oh man, this Sherlock is an a-hole. And then it's like, and then every scene following that with him, I'm just like, oh, it's just getting worse and worse and worse all the time. And yeah, like I said earlier, I'm always fascinated with a good exploration of a dark Sherlock Holmes, and I think that you did that really well. And like, he's clear, like, almost nobody ever thinks that they're the bad guy, right? And he clearly doesn't think he's the bad guy. Like that I think that moment when he tells Watson, "I am justice," that was such a good line and so telling. And I think what I didn't expect, but what made so much sense was for Mycroft to seem to be really the corruptive influence on Sherlock. And I think both the Holmes brothers acted as foils for Moriarty. They're almost like two different versions of Moriarty themselves. Mycroft is like, he just sees the world like purely in numbers and equations, and he doesn't have like any regard for human life or for emotions, like, at all. And then Sherlock is still like a brilliant detective, but he's also like, he's malicious. He is really malicious. It's like that moment when he's like practically goading Watson into murdering him right there in Watson's house, and it's like, yikes. And it only gets worse from there. And it's just and like the whole idea of like what goes down between Mycroft and Sherlock is like so tragic if you love those two characters, but it's also makes so much sense. It's like, Mycroft, they have that brief exchange about Sherlock being Mycroft's bloodhound, and well, like, if he is, then he's an abused bloodhound, and what do abused dogs do? They're gonna turn eventually, and that's what Sherlock does. And it's really heartbreaking.
Yeah. That, I mean, you pretty much encapsulated what we were going for, though. It was we wanted to show two sides to the Holmes family, one that was very analytical, almost robotic, like what if a robot was in charge? What would they do? That's Mycroft. And then the other version of that would be like, well, Sherlock is very smart in his own ways, but he's much more he's let his ego into the equation much more. And because of that, he he feels pain, but then he inflicts pain, and not because it's the logical thing to do, but just because it'll make him feel good, you know. And that's the difference between these two brothers. And yeah, I mean, there's a whole show probably about what happened, like how the two of them came to be, and you know, before our story begins. Yeah, because there's a lot of abuse there, and a lot of neglect, and it makes sense though at the end why Sherlock would want to murder him. So
yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the very last thing on the list, alas, John Clay. We knew him well. I really enjoyed John Clay's expanded role in this, though.
Yeah.
He's a very underutilized character in adaptation, so it was a lot of fun to get to see him in this, and having his own criminal empire was really
well
cool.
He is supposed to be one of the smartest men in London, according to Sherlock. And so, yeah, we needed another smart guy for Moriarty to go up against before, because he can't always just be battling Sherlock. You know, there had to be mini bosses on the way to the final boss. And yeah, John Clay, you know, he has a fun role in the canon, but then again, not much. And so it was a lot of fun to just kind of think about, like, you know, expanding his role, like who is he and why is he the way he is? And I believe that's canonical. Like, he is kind of from royalty, right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't make that up. That's in here. That's in here. And so there's some questions as to, like, well, who are his parents? And then, well, if he is from like a well-to-do background, maybe he would have crossed paths with Moriarty before, or at least they would have gone to the same schools and like been in the same social circles at some point. So yeah, no, and he was a lot of fun. He was a lot of fun.
And I love that scene where Moriarty gets the better of him. It's so good.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, well, we're rooting for that, right? Because I wanted to showcase, and I know Elliot pushed me on this in the writing process a lot, of like, well, what does Moriarty look like if he doesn't have a soul? And he is more like the Moriarty that maybe the canon purports him to be, right? It's probably very similar to the John Clay we meet in this story, of like a man who's he's a businessman in a lot of ways, using his intellect to do criminal things to make a lot of money. And that would have been a different path for Moriarty if he didn't have his own moral code, if he didn't have his love for Rose, if he didn't have Moran by his side, kind of keeping him, you know, tethered to the good. He could have been John Clay, you know?
Yeah, that was really good. And like Dixie said, that exact scene where he's just taking Clay down. Clay is just like watching his life go before his eyes in front of the board. That was really something. That's one.
Elliot, do you remember? This is the episode we had to completely rewrite. We had a different episode 6, and then in the development process, where Elliot was like, "Can we do better?" And I was like, "Well, here's an idea." And both of us had to put our heads together with the help of Treefort and Audible to be like, okay, can we pull this off? You know, how do we take Clay down? And we came up with I think, a much more satisfying way.
It took a little bit of research. I think we wanted to find a way to showcase Moriarty's genius, and that to use that, help you, you know, have him use his genius in service of finding a way to bring down Clay. And so and then obviously the phonograph had become a motif at that point. And so we tried to figure out a way to bring that back into it. And then just in our own research of just trying to find public domain recordings to use and trying to figure out, oh, well, how do these things actually work? How did they record these cylinders? We came up with the idea that maybe Moriarty was genius enough to spoiler alert, to electrify a phonograph and use that to amplify a signal and to actually use it as a recording device, as a remote recording device, which is probably pushing it in terms of the technology of the day, but within the context of our story and his genius and what was possible, we felt like it was not a huge stretch to go there.
I didn't feel like it was a stretch at all. Yeah, because Moriarty in our world, this is his superpower. And so if he's a decade or two ahead of what's technologically possible and realistic, that to me is like he's just ahead of the curve,
Right.
Yeah. I think that's
and we weren't afraid to go there because look, here's a guy who's figured out a way, he's got an equation for the future. So why wouldn't he be able to figure out how to amplify a phonograph, an audio signal, to record it onto a wax cylinder?
Yeah, that was just really cool. Okay, here's a question. What do you think are the odds of like you guys getting to do a second season?
You know what? Have no idea, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think hopefully in success that will yield another season, but we honestly don't know.
Okay.
We don't know, but what would be very helpful is for people like you to keep listening and reviewing.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And spreading the word, that would go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
Audible is very excited about the show. They're doing a great job of promoting it. And I feel like in success, we certainly have more story to tell. I've got at least two more seasons just off the top of the dome, but we can tell this story I'd tell it for as long as people are going to let me to.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing.
Likewise.
Well, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, same.
All right, well, let Audible know.
Yeah, please.
I will talk off people's ears about this. They're going to be sick hearing about it.
Yeah. Tell all your friends in the Sherlockian inner circle that Yeah. We'd love to do more.
Yeah, that would be amazing. All right, well, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about this. It was really exciting to get the opportunity to do it. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, this is a blast. I mean, I didn't know that such a podcast and super fans existed, but it's really been a pleasure to talk to fellow Moriartists about the genius that is Professor James Moriarty. So thank you so much for having us. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, it's been so much fun for us. So exciting. It's like I messaged Dixie and I'm like, we are getting this interview. And she's like, oh, man. Yeah. Just absolutely terrific. And we definitely are rooting for you to get that second season. So
thank you.
So thank you to everybody who's been watching and listening. Go listen to the show if you haven't, and if you just listen to all the spoilers without listening to the show, like, I don't know what to tell you, you're crazy people, but still go listen to it. And we will see you later. So, bye, audience.
Bye.